The order that I have here is starting with Sasha or Sonakshi. Can you see yourself okay?
Yes. Should I share my screen?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay. So, and I can begin, right?
I'm sorry?
I
Yes.
can begin. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining in. Before I start with going over what my research is about, I do have an open question for everybody here. I hope you can all unmute or, put in the chat box what do you think about it. When you think about the term self-harm, what is the first image that pops in your mind?
Cutting.
Correct, exactly. When people tend to think of self-harm, they tend to think of the very physical manifestations of self-harm, like cutting or burning or any physical injury. But self-harm is not limited to only its physical manifestations. Self-harm is any behavior that you voluntarily engage in that's detrimental to your own self. And that could include smoking, rash driving, seeking an adrenaline rush through unsafe measures, procrastination, working out at the gym too much, or excessive burnouts and filled out schedules where you're not taking a rest, not sleeping, not seeking help when you need it. Any behavior that you engage in that is detrimental to yourself is a form of self-harm. And these less visible self-harm forms that go beyond the eye are termed as culturally acceptable self-harms, and these are culturally acceptable because they are less frowned upon than the physical manifestations of them. And these more subtle forms of self harm are a research interest of mine. It is what my thesis is on. And particularly, I have looked at the effect of guilt and redemption on our tendency to engage in behavior that is self detrimental. I've in my study, in my research design, I have operationalized a non-traditional form of self-harm as an aversive audio, and that is an unpleasant stimuli that was administered on the participants, and I wanted to see how long they would endure that unpleasantness. And that audio was like screeching sounds, scrapping metal boards, chalk on the blackboard that just screeches, an unpleasant sound that a participant would voluntarily engage in. So, my hypothesis was that I wanted to see if guilty participants, given a chance at redemption, will be willing to listen to the unpleasant audio for a shorter duration than guilty participants not given a chance for redemption. When I say guilty participants, the participants have been engaging in a guilt inducing prompt. So, research establishes, and it has already been accepted, that guilt increases our tendency to engage in self harm. But it has also been established that individuals will engage in self harm only if they are not given a chance at redemption. And interestingly, this has been called the Dobby effect. If anyone has seen Harry Potter here, they would kind of relate to the concept. But that's been called the Dobby effect, where you engage in self harm only if you cannot or do not have a chance at redemption. The thing about these studies is that the Dobby effect has been established in self punishment in a form of denying yourself pleasure, not in terms of physical injury, not in terms of a culturally acceptable self harm, but in terms of social denied pleasure, which are all social psychology studies. The studies that establish that guilt increases our self harm have all been in the form of physical self-harming behaviors. None of these studies have been on non-traditional forms of self-harm. So the aim of my research is to bridge the gap between these studies and see if these effects also translate to more subtle forms of self-harm. Essentially, I want to see if guilt would also increase your tendency of engaging in non-traditional forms of self-harm. And then I want to see if redemption would make a difference in your engagement of that form of self-harm or your endurance of it. So if I talk about my methodology, The first step that the participants did was writing about an event that they felt guilty about for 10 minutes. It was a 10-minute guilt induction. And then they complete the GSQ-8. The GSQ-8 is the guilt and shame questionnaire, which has been primarily used to measure the amount of guilt that they're facing. Then they were randomly allocated to the apology or the no apology group. Those in the apology group wrote about how they would feel if they were forgiven and how they would redeem for their actions. Those in the no apology group wrote about a neutral event, which was their trip to a grocery store. Both these inductions were 10 minutes again. So for 10 minutes, they write about how they feel, what they feel guilty about. And then for 10 minutes, they either write about how they would feel if they were forgiven, or they're in the neutral condition where they're writing about their trip to a grocery store. After that, the participants all go through the aversive stimuli condition, where they're told to listen to an unpleasant audio through headphones as long as they're willing to. Essentially, I, as the researcher, measured how long they would be willing to listen to that audio. Finally, they fill out the GSQ-8 again. So I have two GSQ-8 scores: their guilt score before they wrote about their guilt and their guilt score after they listened to the audio. My second hypothesis stated that I hypothesized that there will be a decrease in the level of guilts for all the participants after they listen to the audio. In terms of my result, for my first hypothesis, a between groups t-test was conducted to see the difference between the time in seconds for the guilty participants exposed to the neutral condition and those exposed to the redemption condition. And I got a significant difference between them in terms of how long they listened to the audio. The mean difference between the conditions was about 26 seconds. So those in the redemption condition listened to the audio for about 26 seconds less than those in the neutral condition. So the hypothesis was accepted, it was supported, and it was found that those given a chance at redemption will be willing to engage in less non-traditional forms of self-harm than those not given a chance for redemption. For my second hypothesis, I ran an ANCOVA with the initial guilt score as the covariate, and I wanted to see if there would be a decrease in the guilt, which also was significant. So the ANCOVA analysis showed that there is a significant decrease in the levels of guilt. What was interesting is that the level of decrease in the guilt was higher for the neutral condition than the redemption condition. And I think we hypothesized for this to have two probable reasons why that happened. The first reason was that the neutral task could have had a distracting effect and could have had a neutralizing effect on how guilty the participants felt, which is why they had a decreased guilt level. The second could be that on a conscious level, the participants reported a decreased amount of guilt, but on the unconscious level, they reported on the unconscious level, they still were willing to engage in self-harm more than those who were given a chance for redemption. In terms of the implications of the study, I do believe that this is a call for broadening our understanding of what self-harm is and what it stands for and what can be included as a self-harm. And then it also speaks to how subtle interactions in forms of guilt can actually motivate us and influence us to engage in behavior that are detrimental to ourselves. And that is the crux of my study. Thank you so much for listening. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Sonakshi. We're going to go ahead and hold questions until the end of each presentation, but we want to thank you so much. We are going to, Delilah, if you would like to get set up.
Okay, can everyone see this? Okay. So hello everyone, my name is Delilah Dubon. I am in the MA program in clinical psychology with research emphasis at SUNY Brockport. My mentor is Dr. Stacy Birch. So my research is going to be looking at gender differences in facial identification, specifically in regards to eyewitnesses. So eyewitnesses, they play a crucial role in the criminal justice system and legal proceedings. However, the reliability of eyewitnesses can lead to misidentifications and wrongful convictions. So it would be crucial to understand the extent to which other variables, such as gender and race, can influence facial identification accuracy. So it is then important to assess whether any gender differences in same race identifications are also present in other race identifications. Now, within the literature, there have been three major inconsistencies found when it comes to facial identification. The first is there has been a lack of clarity regarding the own gender bias. Now, the own gender bias is a tendency for individuals to recognize their own gender more effectively than individuals of a different gender. Now, according to Lovin et al. In 2011 and Mann and Hills in 2016, they both found that women do demonstrate an own gender bias. Wright and Sladen in 2003, however, found that both women and men demonstrate an own gender bias. And lastly, Hurlitz and Lovin in 2013 in their study found that men do not demonstrate an own gender bias. The second major inconsistency is whether women outperform men in facial identification. So according to Wyrick et al. In 2011, they found that viewing stimuli for a longer period in general and during encoding and re-encoding seem to assist women, and that is a way they outperform men in facial identification. So there's been inconsistencies as to what accounts for the differences between men and women in facial identification recognition ability. And then lastly, a major inconsistency is a generalizability of race of the participants. Magrea et al. In 2011, for example, used participants with unspecified racial characteristics. And various studies have only utilized white participants, which were Wyrick et al. In 2011, Wright and Sladen in 2003, and Mann and Hills in 2016. So my research is to I would like to address inconsistent findings regarding whether women or men have an own gender bias, whether women demonstrate superior facial identification abilities, and whether these findings are generalizable to other races. So my research is going to break into two experiments. For experiment 1, there will be 50 white women and 50 white men who will be viewing photographs of 20 white women and 20 white men. So for experiment 1, to minimize the possibility of extraneous variables, it was essential to hold race constant and restrict the sample to white individuals, which reflects a predominant demographic in the United States, and also to create a same race context for identifying faces of white individuals. For my second experiment, this will be a replication of experiment 1. However, there will be now 50 non-white women and 50 non-white men to create an other race identification context. Now, before my main experiments are conducted, there will be a pilot study. There will be 100 photographs will be rated on a distinctiveness scale. So the definition of the term distinct and a scale ranging from 1 to 6 will be placed under each face presented, where the participant will choose the extent to which a face is distinctive, where 1 is going to represent not at all, and 6 is going to signify very distinctive. So in the main experiments, having stimuli that are equal on distinctiveness is important, so we can say with greater confidence that the photographs were not easily remembered in the main experiments due to a specific feature of the face. And then a t-test will be used to compare the photographs to verify they are similar in average distinctiveness, and the remaining photographs will be used in the study. Now, for the main experiments, there will be an encoding phase where photographs of 20 white women and 20 white men will be presented. After the encoding phase, there will be a filler task, which is going to be a 5-minute visual search task. So the participants will be instructed to select a target shape out of multiple distractors, which will be other colored shapes to interfere with memory recall during the recognition phase. So here on the left, on the bottom, this is an example of what the filler task is going to look like. So they're asking, is there a red triangle? The participant will look among the shapes to see if there is a red triangle or not. And if once they click the correct answer, the task will move forward. Now, after the filler task is conducted, a recognition phase, the recognition phase will begin. So the participants will view the previously shown 40 photographs with 40 new photographs. And they will indicate on their keyboards whether the photograph was previously shown or not, hitting their Y key for yes, it was shown, or N for no, it was not previously shown. After all phases are completed, a post-test questionnaire will be administered. There will be questions regarding gender, race, identity, and contact so that we can explore how these variables may interact with facial identification accuracy. Lastly, D prime scores will be displayed for each of the 4 conditions and will be analyzed in a 2x2 mixed ANOVA statistical test. So in the graph here is what the proposed pattern of results of facial identification accuracy among men and women will look like. So on the left side here, we have women. On the right, we have men. The blue bars are the photographs of females, and the orange bars are the photographs of males. So as the graph depicts, women will score higher than men on photographs of both females and males, with women having a higher average for female photographs, demonstrating the own gender bias. And men will have relatively the same scores for photographs of males and females and have a lower average than women overall. So I have 3 anticipated results. The first is that women will demonstrate superior facial identification for photographs of all faces compared to men. The second is that an interaction is expected, such that women, but not men, will demonstrate an own gender bias. And lastly, that these same effects 1 and 2 will also be present in both same and other race contexts. Now, with these results, the criminal justice system could be better informed on how to tailor its techniques to reduce wrongful convictions and misidentifications provided by eyewitnesses. So thank you all for your time. That is the end of my presentation. If anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and ask them now. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question. Thank you for that. Is this data going to inform a grant, or is this like pilot data for something else?
So it is public data. I guess like the funding's coming from like C-STEP, which I had on the presentation, but yeah, that's all I
Oh,
know.
no, I meant, is it serving as pilot data for a larger trial?
I mean, that is the goal, to like generalize this study to other studies to kind of inform the criminal justice system. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
No, it's usually, I guess if you're not applying for research grants, is what I'm asking, is usually people do a pilot study, and that data serves as the justification to get funded to do a larger size study.
right. So yeah, it wasn't to do like a larger study at all. It was just kind of demonstrating like the distinctiveness of the photographs to move forward, but it wasn't to justify the study in any way.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
We want to say thank you, Dalila. We're going to go ahead and get Scott set up.
Is that coming across? All right, perfect. So my thesis topic is income inequality and the stress response. Is it automatic? And I'm Scott Erlinger. I'm with SUNY Brockport, and my faculty advisor is Dr. Jan Gillespie. So where I kind of start with this is with our evolutionary history and the fact that desiring status is a carryover trait that comes from our evolutionary history. And it makes sense. Way back in time when we were hunter-gatherers, if you achieve status as a good hunter or maybe a storyteller or something like that, there were certain benefits that you might receive, such as people sharing food with you or things along those lines. Um, where we run into problems is, of course, we live in a much more complex world today than we did in our hunter-gatherer times. And things get a little interesting because what the research has shown is that we actually value status so much that we care more about where we rank in our peer group than our absolute income. So, to give a very simple example, we would rather have $10 and everyone else have 5 than have $50 and everyone else have 100, which kind of seems backwards, but that's somewhat how our thinking appears to work. And it's been demonstrated that when we are experience these unequal situations like that, we do have experience a heart rate change, which is an indication of a stressful event occurring. And Wilkinson and Pickett have done some really cool research in this area, demonstrating that both health and social problems are positively correlated to income inequality, both in developed countries and across the United States. So, what I wanted to do based on kind of that background, and I'm going to make this a little bigger just to hopefully help everyone see it. I wanted to design a study that would allow us to, or allowed us to introduce a peer related income inequality stimuli and measure to see if there is an immediate response upon being exposed to that. So a simple 30,000 overfoot overview is study participants will come in, they're going to answer some questions about their personal expenses. They're going to be shown their peer income ranking, and they're either going to see a low status or a high status. And then we're going to measure their stress response and see, is there a different stress response, with the expectation that those that see the low income response are more than likely going to react with a noticeable stress response. In doing research in trying to figure out what was the best way to measure that stress response, and I really wanted to zero in on like that moment in time, right when they're exposed to the stimuli, I found that heart rate variability was the best measure to capture that physiological response right at that time, and that using an EKG or ECG measurement was kind of the gold standard for that. Now, I couldn't afford or it wasn't practical to hook people up to electrodes and all that stuff. So the closest I could come to achieving that was using a little picture of it here, a Polar H10 heart rate monitor, while they were answering the questionnaire and then being exposed to the stimuli. Now, this wasn't the simplest choice to use. I would have preferred a watch or a ring or something like that that's a little less intrusive than having folks put this on around their chest. But I felt that getting the EKG results or that was better than some of the other results that would come through, again, like a watch, because those use different technology that aren't as accurate. So the folks come in, they answer a bunch of questions about their demographics, they answer questions about their job history. And then before this comes on screen, which is going to be our income inequality stimuli, they'll hit a button and the program, it's a Qualtrics survey, will actually kind of look like it's cranking to calculate the individual's discretionary income score. So every effort is tried to make it really look and feel that they're entering their information, that the system is understanding it, and then it's going to run it and do a database comparison and spit out their result. And so eventually folks will see one of, or do see one of these two options, and you can I try and make it as clear as possible where you're either seeing a negative or a positive, and then graphically display where you are, right? Are you on the lower end compared to your peers or the higher end? So basically measuring their response right at that moment in time. And the software I found to do that was called Kubios HRV, or Heart Rate Variability Scientific Software. It's a program designed specifically to use in labs, so it's not used for medical purposes, to measure heart rate variability. And it was pretty cool because what you could do with the program is actually create time slices within a sitting of someone sitting and taking the study. So what we'd be looking at here is someone's heart rate variability for the entire start and finish while they took my Qualtrics survey. And then right here would be that moment in time where they see the income inequality stimuli. And the system will let you build kind of like time slices to build the baseline, and then build some short time slices I built after to try and detect whether or not, again, that reaction occurred right away. Did it occur later? Did it not occur at all? So with that, the preliminary results so far. So about a month ago, we looked at the data, which was about 34 participants. And at that time, unfortunately, there was not a significant result found. But the good news is that since we did that, I just finished last week collecting a full data set from 80 participants. So that is, there's work to be done to analyze that and go through and see what the final result looks like. The last thing I'll add is just, as I was doing this, there just are things that I think you see or you realize as you're going through it, that things that could be done to maybe improve this study. And I've just documented a few here. If I was doing it over again, I would allow more time for the participants to sit and achieve a baseline heart rate. They definitely sat for a few minutes beforehand, but I think maybe in hindsight, I'd have them watch a video, a relaxing video for maybe 5 minutes before we started, just to really get them to what I'd consider a more reasonable baseline. I'd also use, it sounds silly, but more understandable terms to describe dispendable income or really make it clear. There were some people that didn't know what discretionary income meant, or just some of the terminology that I was using. And I feel that if you don't understand what the terminology is, you might not be fully capturing what we're trying to tell them. So I'd work on that a little bit. And I'd also ask the participants when they're signing up to watch a video of how to put on the monitor. I had a real big poster and a privacy area for them to go and put it on. But that was the first time they were seeing it. I think it could have been a little stressful doing that versus if they had watched the video up front. So those are some things that I would do to improve it. But at the end of the day, I will say I think there's value in this line of research. I was really trying to zero in on this microscopic level of that moment in time where you might experience that stress response. But ultimately, from a societal standpoint, when we're talking about increasing health costs, crime, and how do we combat that, the data shows that income inequality in a lot of respects does tie back to those things. So that wraps up my presentation. I don't know if you want to do questions now, or happy to answer them at the end if there are any.
Thank you, Scott. Do we have any questions now?
Sure. Thank you for that. It was very interesting. Where did you get your participants and why 34?
So my target was actually 76. And I want to say I round up with 80, but then there are a few I had to carve out for different reasons. I didn't quite hit 76, but that was giving me an 80 a power of 80 at using a mix factor 8 and over. So the 34 was just all right, I'm almost halfway through. What does this look like? What am I seeing? Can I get some preliminary results? So that was I did that probably about a month ago, and now that I've finished, I'm gonna run the data again with the full population and see if it changes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on to Michael. Michael, if you would like to get set up.
Sure, thank you. I'm just gonna share my screen. If I can figure out which screen it's gonna let me share. Where is this? Sorry. Ugh. Uh, it's not being nice to me here. If you could just bear with me 1 second. Um, no. All right. I'm having problems sharing my screen. Why is this happening?
Michael, why don't you start telling them about what you're doing anyway?
Sure. So here we go. Um, I'm presenting data today about understanding the odds of having a detectable HIV viral load among sexual minority men with HIV who use stimulants. And this is an analysis using Anderson's behavioral model. The Anderson's behavioral model is a model that looks at um, different risk factors in blocks, and those risk factors are called predisposing factors, need factors, and um, why am I'm forgetting everything? And enabling factors. And what you do is you add these blocks of variables into a model and see how the models overall predict your outcome, and our outcome was detectable viral load. These were preliminary data that, or sorry, baseline data that are a secondary analysis of an ongoing clinical trial. And so these were participants in a larger randomized study. And we were looking at their baseline risk factors and how that predicted their viral load, which was binary, detectable, not detectable, at the 6 month time period. And so what we did is that we first established what are the variables that we're going to include in these blocks. And so the first blocks that you look at in Anderson's model, you would look at predisposing factors, things like age, race, ethnicity, marital status, education, employment, living conditions, mental health, and substance abuse. Um, then we would look at their enabling factors, which are things like health insurance, monthly income, things like number of physician visits. Are they presently going to an HIV specialist? And lastly, you look at the need factors, and here our only need factors were taking medications for HIV, as well as HIV adherence. So how um, consistently they took their medications. And so what we do is we looked at how these factors build into this behavioral model, where we can see that we had 108 participants um, who had a detectable viral load and 188 who had an undetectable viral load. There were not really big differences between the groups a priori, though those who had a detectable viral load tend to have lower education. They were also more likely to be living in a homeless shelter. Um, they were also more likely to be daily drug users. Um, the factors as we built our model in these stages were actually consistently predictable or predictive of the outcome. And so what we see is that factors that were in the predisposing factors like education and homelessness, they were strong predictors of detectable viral load throughout all three stages of the modeling. Things like daily drug use was a significant predictor in the modeling when we just looked at enabling factors. However, it was no longer predictive when we included the other variables, the other blocks of variables. Um, and we saw that change in medication status. So if you had a change in your HIV medication in the last 6 months, it was also highly predictive of whether or not you had a detectable viral load. And we felt that that was suggestive of that those patients were more involved in their care. Um, when you see in the blocks the variables becoming significant and then not significant, normally you would that would highlight, oh, there's some sort of problem. Maybe we're not powered well. Maybe there's a lot of collinearity and that's causing some interference. But when variables dropped out of our four-stage model, their effect size stayed in the same direction and in a similar magnitude. However, we saw an increased variability or variance. And so that suggests that we probably weren't necessarily powered to use all of these variables consistently in these blocks, as this was really an exploratory study to see how this model predicts. That said, when you see a consistency of these effect sizes across the building of the model, you expect that had we had a larger sample size, those would be consistent as well statistically. But we weren't going to report on them as the final model. So we do see consistency with education and consistency with homelessness, and then with changes in your HIV medication use within the last 6 months as being highly predictive of viral load at the 6 month time period. That's really all we have. If there are any questions, feel free. I'm gonna have a sip of coffee. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We're going to go ahead and if there are no questions at this time, we're going to go ahead and move on to Justin.
Yes, hello. Just share. All right, I'm also having troubles. It's not letting me share, but I could start talking about it as I figure it out. Oh, here we go. There we go. Cool. So my research was on Bad Bunny's subversion and parody of reggaeton. So it's more of a musicological study. And so for those who might not know who Bad Bunny is, he's a very famous Puerto Rican Latin artist who performs in the reggaeton genre. And this genre kind of came to be within the early 2000s, very late 90s is when it started, but early 2000s is when it kind of solidified its place in the international stage. And it started off as this very machismo genre and very hypermasculinized and heteronormative. And so here comes Bad Bunny around 2017, 2018, and he's kind of doing these subversions, and later on he's actually parodying the genre. And so I have here two different pictures of him. So this is number one over here is his reggaetonero persona, and down here is actually him as his female persona in one of his music videos. And then so what I did was I analyzed his studio recordings, his music videos, his live recordings, lyrics, interviews, and some scholarship on what is subversion and parody in music and gender performances. and found that he's on the surface level, it seems like he's conforming to these kind of heteronormative and hyper masculinized stereotypes that the genre has kind of built up. But in reality, he's, as is the title of my project, that he's subverting these stereotypes and making a parody out of it and basically criticizing it on the international stage. He is the most listened to, one of the most listened to artists just in the world, period. Hopefully when I zoom in, it also zooms in for you guys. So here I have 3 different screenshots of music videos. So the one on all the way to the left is Daddy Yankee. He was kind of the international face of reggaeton before Bad Bunny came along. And in his music video for Gasolina, it's just archetype of the genre, and it's just I would say probably top 5 most famous reggaeton songs worldwide. And his music video for it, he's on this racetrack racing expensive cars. There's a lot of women dancing around him. He's wearing baggy clothes, fancy jewelry, all this stuff. And the image next to Daddy Yankee, so this middle image, is Don Omar, which it was just another very famous reggaetonero. And this is his music video for Dale Don Dale, another extremely famous reggaeton song. And same thing, he's wearing baggy clothes, he's wearing fancy jewelry, he's walking off his private jet to get into his expensive convertible that's being driven by his, we could only presume, some kind of, love interest, whether it's, an affair or whether it's some serious love interest, who knows. And to the right here, we have Bad Bunny, who's kind of, on the surface level, again, you can see he looks the same, baggy clothes, standing on top of a convertible. These like flower people, these are women dancing as he's rapping, and so on the surface it kind of seems like it's conforming to these boundaries that are set up in the genre, whereas he's actually criticizing these reggaetoneros and kind of saying, oh, this is so machismo, what's the deal with this. And so further into the music video, this is for his song Yo Pereo Sola, which was a hit off of his I believe 2018 album. It might have been 2020. Here we have him as a transgender persona, and then also as a either cross-dressed or female persona. And he's undermining what it really means to be a reggaetonero and what the genre, I guess, requires of its practitioners. And so through this, this is the subversion aspect of his performances. And over here, number 5, we have a live performance of one of his most famous songs, Titi Me Pregunto, which is off of his most famous album. It's one of the most streamed albums in the world. And he's seen kissing his male performer, one of his male dancers. And this precedes a kiss that he gives to one of his female dancers. And during this moment in the song, he's singing about how he wants to fall in love, but he can't fall in love, and he has this sexual confusion or frustration, or however you want to interpret it. And again, whatever Bad Bunny does is seen on a worldwide stage. So he's seen here kissing one of his male performers, and he's directly undermining what it means to be a reggaetonero. It's kind of breaking down these heteronormative expectations, and he's openly expressing his sexual curiosities. And this is in a music video as well that this is a criticism towards the genre. He's chained up by these ruling women and kind of subverting the gender roles within the genre. And there's a lot to just be said with that scene alone. So my findings were that, yes, he's on the surface level for some of his songs, especially his earlier music, he's what seems to be conforming to these stereotypes or this machismo, persona that you have to build in order to make it in the music industry as a reggaetonero. Yet what he's actually doing is criticizing and almost in a way making fun of that stereotype and trying to break down these hypermasculine and heteronormative I guess, normalities that have plagued the genre for quite some time. And he actually this year released a new album, so I'm hoping to actually continue some of this research with the new album, because the new album has completely just broken down his sound and image altogether. He's kind of, again, he's the most famous reggaetonero, so anything he does basically paves a new path or creates another space within the genre. And this new album incorporates a whole bunch of different ideas about colonization in Puerto Rico and Hispanic culture, nationalism, and he's incorporating salsa and indigenous rhythms to his music, redefining his sound altogether. So he spent a lot of time breaking down a lot of the stereotypes that have kind of in a way gatekeeped the genre, and he's paved way for queer artists and female artists, and now he's going further on and just taking reggaeton to a whole new place, and that I hopefully plan to further my research on that. And that's all I have to share here.
We want to say thank you, Justin. Are there any questions for Justin?
Thank you for that, Justin. That was great. Are you planning to do some kind of qualitative or quantitative analysis of what you found? Or is this a review, like a kind of like a review study?
It's kind of a review, and where I didn't get to go with this project yet, I should say, is that I didn't really analyze the reception of him just to the reggaeton audience in general, and then so that's probably where I would go further and actually get some quantitative data of how is he received, and how has that changed over time, his reception.
What would you be using, like if it's say on YouTube and there are comments, would you be analyzing that kind of data, or like on Reddit or something?
Exactly. Yeah, it would be a lot of where the discourse happens, I guess, in like a vernacular setting, but also the streams of his songs, and the most popular songs of his, and what are the the criticisms he has within those songs themselves, and then I guess the receptions of those songs as well. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions for any of our presenters? Okay, we can go ahead and wrap up. We want to say thank you to everyone who presented today. And we're going to just head back into that main room where you can go ahead and log off, okay? You'll have a wonderful day.